Okay, push two. This is okay. I'm going to try this and see if this is going to work. And so I'm going to get right to it. If I can actually minimize this thing down so it's out of my way. If it's not out of my way, then it's not going to work. Okay, so actually, what we're going to do is, and I'm going to try to, so that we can kind of have this and then actually review it or look at it from so you can actually review it before class, then have the class discussion. Okay, so we're going to start on this one. Okay, I broke this up in two parts. This is part one of Progressivism and Republican Roosevelt. Okay, you should actually, with the themes and everything that's within this chapter as well, uh, I'll send that post out like I normally do before we get started. Okay, a couple things. One, progressive movement actually is applied to social, economic, and social problems, especially dealing with industry. The industrial problem, as we said, the larger increasing of industrialization in America and kind of the growth of industry outweighed or outran the progressive part of it. And that's where, progressive movement is an actual attempt to kind of catch up to some degree. Remember, too, that progressivism actually starts at at a city level, then it advances to the state level, and then it becomes a national platform, even to some degree, especially with Teddy Roosevelt as the president. And I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as I possibly can. I know you guys have a life, right? And so do I. Okay, an example is the Beaker Boys headline, as you can see up in the right-hand corner of the screen. Lad fell to his death. They're extremely dangerous places to work. You had, remember, very little child law. There was actually no child labor laws. It does come about because of the progressive movement. This actually was a photograph of the Beaker Boys, or what they were referred to as the Beaker Boys, that worked in coal mines. And you can look at, see how young these kids are. Most of these kids were actually, a lot younger than yourselves that were working, 14, 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and in coal mines. So extremely dangerous. And so we're going to look at that as well, as far as a theme part. Okay. Roosevelt does handpick his successor, William Taft, and we'll go into this a little bit later on. Of course, Taft kind of his idea of a good successor backfires on him, and he actually aligns himself with the Republican old guard, and that causes Teddy Roosevelt to start up a third party crusade on progressive. We'll get all of this in a little bit more detail as we go along. Okay, one of the greatest things that the reform is often referred to, the progressive movement is often referred to as the greatest reform since abolition itself. The progressive movement actually gives fruit to a number of entities that actually begin to rise up out of the progressive movement. And this is not uncommon in history when a movement begins, that others begin to ride on on that movement's coattail, and begins to gain national attention. Okay, populism, which we've already talked about, for example, socialists during this time period become very prominent, very vocal, very in large in numbers, even to a great degree. The social gospelers, gain prominence during this time period. Female reformers. The female reformers, remember, the females have been as far as major reformers even before the Civil War. Remember the temperance movement, the advocating for abolition of slavery. So they've been around. They just become, I guess, greater in number and much more vocal in expressing their opinions. And of course, without doubt, muckraking journalists, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, the government take on a role. The big issue becomes that should government take on the role in fixing problems caused by industry, or should nature take its course? Okay, the same concept of what we talked about in the last chapter was social Darwinism. Okay, should the strong survive? If, the strongest will survive, the fittest, and if you're not, then you should go by the wayside. And this is a prevalent question even to this day. Should government take on the role of fixing problems with industry? And we saw that with, a couple of years back with the bailout and the question still, being raised today, how much the government should have control or should not have control. So actually the question hasn't really gone away. It just keeps rising its head. Socialist, like I said, had became much more vocal, more prevalent during this time period. Socialism, in the United States has been around, still is to this day. Probably not as much. It's usually when the economy becomes really bad or things are becoming, a major reform needs to be done, that you begin to see more and more prevalent or the push for socialism. And again, I think this has a major tie in with the conditions in the United States today. You hear more of a socialistic, progressive speeches being made, people identifying them as progressives. Hillary Clinton identified herself as a modern progressive. Our current president has actually identified himself as a modern progressive, and neither one of them have claimed that they're socialists, but the concept of the idea of modern progressivism. So the socialists were also very heavy or very influential into the labor unions. And remember, labor unions in this time period are not looked on real favorably. They become much stronger as we can progress along, but the fact is that they aren't looked at very favorably by most, especially elitists, I guess you'd say, industrial owners, people that own companies, big business owners did not like the unions. And then for various reasons, for obvious reasons, as well. So, and we'll talk about those as well. Okay, progressive began to city, like we said, in the city and state level. Women, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, they played prominent roles of the day, bringing awareness. They pushed concerns for expansion of the traditional roles of wives and mothers, the traditional stay at home, keep your mouth shut, have the children, raise the children, and that's it. But women began to express themselves more openly and to challenge those traditional roles, and not only that, but they also expand their importance. And like I said, women have always been involved in major reforms. They raise up several issues or involved in several issues such as the child labor, white slavery, basically prostitution, and the conditions in the poor tenement housings as well. And not only that, but also consumer causes. Consumer safety, consumer products, the need for different consumer products. They also push for that type of industry, so you should know about each one of those. These are all key things that you should know about. Against, again, the concept of the temperance movement, crusading against drunkenness, not only the alcohol issue, in which later will lead to prohibition, but moral reformers, the concept of the morality of the family, the morality of individuals, and not only that, the morality of society as a whole. And they see this as being that men, to a large degree, are the biggest problem. They're corrupting the system. They are the ones that are leading us down this wrong path, and using, especially as a concept of seducing young women into prostitution. So this picture on the left is actually I call it a propaganda picture. I don't know if that's probably a really good term to use. It was a photograph that was used often in the white slave hell, or also known as the Christ of the Midnight of the slums of Chicago, to promote this. Now, no one actually knows for sure if the lady in the picture is actually being seduced by the man, but it played the part of what they wanted it to play, and it was worked. Okay, the child labor, using children in labor. If you go to my website, go to down on the left-hand side, it says student presentation. There's a video, YouTube video that one of former students created. I would like for you to watch that one. So when you have time, actually watch the video. It's very well done. It's under A Push 2, and it says child labor. I think you'll enjoy it. We did a really good job on that video, so I'm not going to go on a whole lot about child labor because you're going to watch the video anyway. Okay, tenement houses. We talked about tenement houses a couple times here. The concept of the immigrants coming in. Then when we talked about Tammany Hall, we talked about the corruption that was taking place and how they were being immigrants were being exploited by Tammany and others, and the political machines that did exist during the time. And can keep in mind that the tenements were extremely overcrowded. They were extremely unsanitary. There's an old saying that says, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That actually came during this time period in the early 1900s because of the tenement housing. Water had to be toted all the way up to the several floors, and everyone in the family, if there's 12, 15 people living in the apartment, they all would take a bath in that same water instead of toting the water for every single person. Well, you imagine by the time the last person that would take the bath would maybe be the baby, and then the water's so nasty and dirty, and all they did was they just dumped it right out the window. Most people did not have running water, so that means they also didn't have indoor plumbing. Remember the red bucket in the classroom? Same concept, but they actually used the red bucket in their tenement houses, and when it was full, they just opened up a window and tossed it right out. So you can imagine even the areas around the tenement houses were extremely unsanitary. Major rat problems and disease and everything. It was pretty bad. Okay, this actually is a picture of in New York City, where clothes are being strung out. It's just you can see how compact it is, and so the whole tenement housing issue. You have a large amount of people being packed into the cities and very few pieces of living spaces. Now, like I said earlier, especially with the women with the forms of the temperance, that becomes a major issue. Trying to combat this problem with alcoholism. You have to remember too, because of the compact conditions, the low morale, what many people saw as a decline in morality. Escaping to drink was considered to be one of those vices, just escaping to the bottle. And as it was portrayed in this drawing or this cartoon, I guess you would call it, it's actually entitled "Please, Paul, Think of Our Baby." Because men would go into the bars and to drink, and if you look on the left hand side, it's free lunch for every drink. So they were being quote unquote enticed into this. Companies did begin to hire people that would stay sober because most of the industrial accidents that were taking place were not only because they were unsafe, but a lot of them did take place because people had been drinking, and it was very prominent. The drinking was a prominent problem, and so that companies were losing employees, and not that they were being sued or anything or had workers' comp. Not at least at this time they don't anyway. Okay, I'm trying to move through this guys pretty fast. I'm just get through the part one get this posted for you. Okay, the progressive movement at the national level. Teddy Roosevelt, national government under square deal. Guys, underline, circle, whatever you knew, square. And I'm going to post some of the terms for Chapter 28 for you. I'll try to get them done very soon. Square deal. The square deal always comes up on the AP exam. It's going to be either in multiple choice, or it will show up somewhere that you need to use it in an FRQ and even possibly in DBQ. So definitely make sure you understand the concept of what Teddy Roosevelt's square deal was. The square deal deals with the interests of conflicts that were existing between laborers and corporate trust. And if you go, I'm going to quickly try to go back. Let me see if I can, without, let me escape out of this, and I'm going to go back to that first slide because of the fact that on this one, this saying, I actually should have mentioned this a while ago. This is the idea of kind of a principle of Roosevelt's square deal concept. When I say believe in a square deal, I do not mean do not give every man the best hand. If the cards do not come to any man, or if they do come and he has not got the power to play them, then that's his own affair. All I mean is that, and this is the core of it, all I mean is that there should be no crookedness in the dealing. And that is the concept of a square deal. And again, like I said, I'm gonna jump back down here, guys. Sorry about that. I should kind of mentioned that before. Let's jump on. Yeah, we'll start with this one. Okay, so let me get back up here. Okay, again, the idea of dealing with corporate, between labor and corporate trust. Um, Teddy Roosevelt is a champion for consumer safety and conservation. Probably more so, and I'm going to mention that in a minute, concerning his conservation things, and actually probably to a large degree, that is to a very large degree, his ends up being his legacy is the conservational part. Um, Teddy Roosevelt, by most historians, believe that he was actually a very brilliant politician, and they. The thing is that he's brilliant because he could actually make people think he was doing more than he actually was. And that's not to say that he didn't get things done. He did, but not as much as at least he made it appear to be. So I guess that's why they like to consider that he was a brilliant politician. I think Teddy Roosevelt was a pretty good politician to a large degree. Okay, he believed that there were such things as bad trust, and guys, one of the things you need to understand about trust, I'm going to kind of give you a quote that's from Theodore Dwight on trust, and I think it kind of sums things up. And the quote is actually, "A trust is simply the case of one person holding the title of property, whether land or chattels." And chattels is chattels. Okay, chattels is the same thing we used to call in the old slave codes. Chattels were known. That's what they referred to when they referred to blacks. It's the same word that comes from cow. Basically, what it means, chattels means is property. Okay, for a benefit of another, term to beneficiary. Nothing can be more common or useful. But the word is now loosely applied to certain class at commercial agreements, and by reason of a popular or an unreasoning dread of their effect, the term itself has been contaminated. This is unfortunate, for it is difficult to find a substitute for it. There may, of course, be illegal trust, but a trust in and by itself is not illegal. When resorted to for a proper purpose, it has been for centuries enforced by courts of justice and is, in fact, the creature of a court of equity. Okay, so trusts are not, to say illegal. Trusts are large corporations and how corporations work. The property owning and all the aspects of it into the trust. But Roosevelt did believe that there were bad trust. And in other words, there were companies that were exploiting people, exploiting not only their own workers, but exploiting the public as well. And Teddy had very little toleration for bad trust, and that the good trust should be left alone, bad trust shouldn't. Okay, coal miners strike. This is a very important event during this time period. You should definitely know this. Coal miners, okay, without doubt, were extremely treated horribly. They worked under horrific conditions. Coal miners would actually go in, they breathed the coal dust. Children that were being used, and as we mentioned earlier in that very opening image, that were being used in the coal mines. Most of them did not see their 21st birthday. They didn't die in the mines. They usually would die from what became known as coal. I forgot what the name it was. It's a lung disease. I forgot. It's coal miner's disease or something like that. Okay, but they eventually go on strike because of how bad they're being treated and the conditions in which they're being forced to work in. The miners during this time are led by George Bear. He actually delivers this great quote, and I'm going to read it to you. "Workers will not be cared for by the labor agitators, but by the Christian men to whom God in his infinite wisdom has given the control of the property interest of this country." Okay, when the coal miner owners would not negotiate with the workers, Roosevelt was very upset that the owners would not sit down and negotiate with the workers. And Roosevelt actually delivers this quote: "I am furious with the extraordinary stupidity and bad temper of the wooden-headed gentry who operate the mines." And you can tell he's not real happy with them. Okay, if it had not been for the dignity of my office, I would have taken one of them by the seat of the britches and chucked him out of the window. And you guys thought I was the only one that ever said britches. Okay, so Roosevelt extremely upset with the concept that they won't negotiate. As this drags on, Teddy Roosevelt threatens the coal miner owners that he will take over the mines. He will have the army work the mines, and it wasn't that he was going to get rid of the coal miners that were working the mines, but the army would actually take control of the mines. So the miners got kind of worried that this was actually going to happen. It's the old standoff. Who's going to blink first? They blink, and Roosevelt had every intention of doing this. There's several, documents and stuff of which he actually had spoken about actually how to implement this and how to do this. Now, the big question about this is why is this such a big deal? If you remember Adam Smith's, when we talked about Adam Smith and World Civ Honors and kind of briefly, and last year as well, with the wealth of nations, one of the things that Adam Smith believes is that government should stay out of business. Laissez-faire, remember the concept. So this is a really big deal because Roosevelt is actually interfering or going to or threatening to interfere with a business. Yeah, you don't like the way the business runs. Yeah, you don't like the way it's acting. But does government have the right to actually go in to a privately owned company and manipulate it or control it or change it or whatever? Okay, so that's why this is a really big deal because it's the first time that the government is actually threatening to come in and completely take over the business with not only saying, hey, stop it, or we're going to do away with some of your land rights or whatever the case may be. He says, no, we're talking about using the army to take over these mines. So it is a really big deal, and it's something you should bring up in case you're ever doing an essay on this. Okay. Like I said, Roosevelt was an extreme conservationist. I always say conservative. Conservationist. He loved being outdoors. He was known as a good huntsman. Matter of fact, he even goes over to Africa, and I'll get to that story in a minute. Okay, and he actually loved being outdoors. He spent more time probably outdoors than most presidents since then have. Okay, he did appall the pillage of lumber and mineral companies, the stripping of the land, the overforestation, chopping down the trees in the land. So he becomes a major champion for preserving land and making them federal parks so that people can't just go in there and just start stripping the land. He does earmark a couple million acres for mining of coal. And like it said, excuse me, his conservation actually and reclamation of the land becomes one of Teddy Roosevelt's greatest legacies of all. Okay, pictured on this picture at Yosemite Park. I think I mentioned this in another slide, but anyway, this is John Muir that is pictured next to him, and John Muir was a Scottish. Wow, I got my throat. Maybe that's that quivering thing again. Scottish-born American naturalist. Okay, he was also an author. He was a big-time conservative naturalist. Excuse me, I say conservative. Okay, Roosevelt in his annual message to Congress in 1907. This is a really good quote. Again, if you can paraphrase this some way, if you get an essay or the FRQ on this topic, good big hint for you. You may want to be able to paraphrase and know that it came from a message to Congress in 1907. We are prone to speak of the resources of this country as inexhaustible. This is not so. The mineral wealth of the country, the coal, the iron, the oil, gas, and the like does not reproduce itself, and therefore is certain to be exhausted ultimately. And wastefulness is dealing with it today means that our descendants will feel the exhaustion a generation or two before they otherwise would. So he is a major conservationist, and he believes in preserving as much of the natural resources as we possibly can for future generations. And again, this is a topic that still has resonance or relevance and even into today. And we have these great national parks due to and in part of because of Teddy Roosevelt. So these are just some images that were taken up in Yosemite Park. If you've never been, oh my gosh, you should go. Okay, again, like I said, I used the picture again, so I'm going to briefly, Yosemite 1903, and as I mentioned, that Muir is actually an advocate for preservation of the wilderness. Now, one of the things that Roosevelt, for the preservation of parks and wildlife refuges, he's more actually interested in the careful management of natural resources. It's not that they can't be used. He understands that we do, as the population begins to grow, we're going to need the lumber, we're going to need the coal. Like I said, he preserves a lot of property for the coal mining. He understands that. So Roosevelt's really is not that we don't, there's not things out there we need. Those raw materials are definitely needed, but he was very more for the careful management of those natural resources, including even on the federal lands that the United States actually controlled. Okay, development concept, preservationist, wow, I can't speak, and the multiple use of the people. Okay, that's I just messed that one up, I think. Okay, the government's position of rational use generally was worked well for both industry and the people. So for the most part, and again, because of Roosevelt's actions and things that he did, we do have a lot of management that takes place of natural resources, raw materials. Now, people today, say some of this stuff should be relinquished or some of it should be lessened as we begin to, we need to find natural gas and oil, of which so we become interdependent upon ourselves instead of being dependent upon other countries. Again, that's one of those interpretational things that each one of you have to make of your own. Okay, that's going to be the it for part one. And like I said, I will post part two very soon. Hopefully, that kind of helps. And watch these, because what we're going to do is, and then we'll discuss this stuff in class in more depth, and we'll have a discussion. That's the purpose of these. So if you don't watch them, they don't do it good. Okay, guys, I'll see you in part two. I gotta shut this thing down though, and I almost forgot how to do that. So all right, take care.